Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Rais, thank you for being with us today. Ma'ali al-Wazir, thank you. Ishac, Marina, thank you. I will say a very good, very quick word of welcome, mainly, not introduction. I just want to, on behalf of the Fares Center for Public Policy and International Affairs, I'm Joseph Bahou, the director of the Institute, just welcome you all for what I think is not only a very interesting event as such, but also a very timely event. And I would like to very warmly and very sincerely thank Minister Amer Bisat, a friend of IFI, a friend of AUB, a friend of us, who granted us the privilege of doing his first, I would say, public speech. Of course, he went on media, but his first real public policy speech at IFI, for us, it's a mark of really of honor and esteem. I think the paper that we will discuss is exactly what we at IFI and policy institutes like ours are supposed to do. This is what we are created for, meaning translating knowledge production as much as we can, research, expertise into policy recommendations. And we couldn't be more happy to do so when we had a paper that was written before Minister Amer Bisat became minister. He was still Amer, our friend Amer. And then he became a minister, and then we said, okay, this is the perfect illustration of what a policy could do, a policy institute could do, meaning channeling reflection, thought, debate into policy action. I won't be very long, but I want to say a very quick, intimate story about this paper. Probably, maybe Ishac will say a few words about it. This paper has a long history. It was born something like 4 years ago, or 3 years ago. It was started to be born. It was incepted 3 years ago. It was after the revolution or the public upheaval of 2019. And we were a group of people, without disclosing too much secrets. And one of us was Amer Bisat. One of us was Ishac Diwan, our fellow at IFI and visiting professor of practice at the economics department. And one of these people was the man who became Prime Minister, Nawaf Salam. And we were thinking then about what can we do one day, if the country had the chance to be on a right track. On several issues. We made a lot of papers having to do with sectarianism, with justice, with decentralization, and then also with economics. And this paper was led, this project, this small project, was led then by Dr. Ishac Diwan and Minister Amer Bisat. So the paper was ready, and it's been a while, it's been maybe 6 months, that Amer and Ishac and I, with Marina, Chamma, the communication director at IFI, are exchanging mails about the opportunity of publishing this paper. And we said, why would we publish it with an interim government, with a political vacuum, with an institutional void? And it doesn't make sense. And then, all of a sudden, things started to happen. And we said, maybe this is the proper time to open the debate, not only on what a productive economy is or could be, but what economy of Lebanon could and should be. And this is what I think Marina Chamma will moderate very brilliantly. Marina is the communication director at IFI. She's also an LSE political economist, so I think she knows quite a good amount of things on the topic. I wish you a very productive debate, a very interesting debate. Thank you for being here on a Monday of Ramadan. I wish you also a Ramadan Kareem, and see you more often here at IFI. Thank you.
Thank you. So once again, welcome everyone to today's discussion. As you know, the title of today's discussion is Towards a Productive New Lebanon, which in itself is rather refreshing, because for years and decades on end, one of the most important attributes given to Lebanon's economy were along the lines of a miracle economy, for example, as people were made to believe that the country boasted of everything necessary to guarantee growth and prosperity. We were told that we had a robust banking sector, a stable exchange rate, low inflation, and a steady supply of remittances. Back then, a genuine productive economy was never part of the equation. Of course, we all know what happened to that miracle, the dramatic, multifaceted collapse that was bound to happen, and very surely it did. We fast forward to 2025 with a broad-based conviction that the post-Civil War economic model is long dead. And although the country has only just emerged from a devastating war with economic costs of around $14 billion, today, the political landscape has certainly changed. And therefore, many believe that there is indeed hope. Towards a Productive New Lebanon is the title of the research paper, or rather, the Economic Vision for Lebanon, co-authored by the gentlemen that I have the pleasure of sharing the stage with today, and about which they will explain much more in detail to us this afternoon. Suffice it to say that their vision for a productive economy is bold, just because we expect it to take place here in Lebanon, a place where we all know that it sure has what it takes, but recent history has proven time and again that the deeply rooted constraints for all kinds of reform, including economic, have led us all into the trap of cynicism and depression, as the co-authors of the paper very well describe. Though this cynicism and depression is something that they do not want us to fall into this time around. So without further ado, and just as a very quick introduction to our discussants today, first of all, I'd like to introduce His Excellency Amer Bisat. Dr. Amer Bisat is Lebanon's recently appointed Minister of Economy and Trade. Prior to his appointment, he was the Managing Director and Global Head of Emerging Markets Fixed Income at BlackRock. His experience in finance and public policy includes roles in the private sector at Morgan Stanley, UBS, and as a senior economist at the IMF. He has also been in academia, teaching economics at Columbia University. Dr. Bisat holds a BA from AUB and a PhD in economics and finance from Columbia University. We also have the pleasure to have Dr. Ishac Diwan, who, as Joseph mentioned, is a professor of economics here at AUB and is no stranger to IFI as well. He is an associate fellow with us and has been for a while. He is also the research director of the Finance for Development Lab. He was also entered recently at the École Normale Supérieure in Paris, holding the chair of the Economy of the Arab World. Dr. Diwan holds a PhD in economics from UC Berkeley and has also taught at Columbia University and at the Harvard Kennedy School. So without further ado, I'd like to open the floor. Just as a kind reminder, we will be recording this session. Copies of the report are available in English, as you may have seen on your way into the auditorium, and hopefully soon we will make an Arabic translation available as well. So once again, welcome, ahla wa sahla fikun, and the floor is yours.
Put the PowerPoint up.
A second.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Marina, for nice introductions. I'm tasked here with warming up the crowd a little bit more. Yeah, I need the mic to warm up the crowd a little bit more before we give you Amer. So, I want to start by saying that, Amer studied economics here at AUB. So, he went to the world with his bright mind and diplomatic demeanor, but equipped with solid knowledge from AUB here. And it's kind of the return of, the prodigal son parable. And it reminds us of two important things for this meeting. The first is that we have a diaspora abroad that's very much alive and part of the nation. In many ways, we have a global Lebanon where the geography has around it people like Amer, like me, like many others in the room that, when this terrible collapse came into the country, got together to think hard about what to do to lead to the redemption. And the second, maybe, thing that this reminds us, this report, is, and the fact that Amer started at the UB here, is the return of economics. I mean, we lived in La La Land with rivers of money flowing, and time has come to work harder at being productive, and that's what this report and this meeting is about. So back to the genesis. Joe, you started us on these moments. In 2021, a few years ago, so that was 2 years about 2 years after the Saura, 1 year after the collapse after the default on the Eurobond, and sometime in March, like now, and so, there was much intellectual fervent thinking about what to do for the rebirth, right? The other parable, for the phoenix to get reborn from the ashes. We used to be a group of friends that would meet at then Judge Nawaf Salam and Sahar Basiri in their house in Paris. Sahar was a representative of the UN, of Lebanon at UNESCO in Paris. And, there were intellectuals and activists and entrepreneurs debating all kinds of things, how to fix the banking sector and what to do with the exchange rate and many other issues. And one day, Judge Nawaf told us, you keep talking about fixing things, but you tell us the model is over, the model is dead, and so are we going to rebuild what exactly? Why don't you spend some time figuring out what should be the economy of the future? So of course we would argue that given the way politics is in Lebanon, not much is possible and this and that. And so at some point Nawaf said, look, why don't you come up with a solid vision, consult broadly with society, and then we'll have to fix politics equipped with this vision so that we can actually realize our potential. And so that's what we started doing. We set up to consult, and so we set up a series of webinars. These are the titles, some of the people that were involved. What are Lebanon's comparative advantages? We talked to entrepreneurs that were involved in the innovative sectors. We talked about promising business models in more traditional areas, about agriculture, how to preserve our environment. And then, we put together a report and we debated it. And then COVID came and things became tougher and we got depressed and we stopped bargaining and we laid this to rest. Until, of course, what happened and you know about it, and so we revived this report. And so the main, I think, starting point is what I see from my window every morning, which is boats coming full of merchandises, and in the afternoons, boats leaving empty. And there was a flow of funds that was financing this kind of economy in the past, but that flow has stopped. And right now, what do we export to pay for all the goods? We export you, the students. And so, we want you to stay in the country. And so the vision is for you to be productive here as opposed to be productive abroad, at least to have that opportunity, not to say that no one's going to travel. And so really the starting point is that future prosperity can only be achieved through productivity of goods, but mostly of services. So this place has to become a place of actual production. And so, the question becomes, can that happen? Can Lebanon be productive? We know Lebanon as a place for consumption, for tourism, for summers. What on Saifi? Can it be productive? And, we got reminded as we spoke to historians that Lebanon has been productive in the past. It has a history of production. The Merchant Republic of the 50s and the 60s was the fastest growing economy in the world. We should not forget that. It was like the champion of production and growth. It attracted entrepreneurs from all over the Arab world, and it had these entrepreneurs, and it was very productive. The post-war civil boom was also super productive. It's a huge recovery. Mr. Signora, you were there, one of the main driver of this. An impressive reconstruction. So many people came back to live in Lebanon. And so, we're encouraged by the fact that we've done it before. But we also know the downside of these two periods that we have to learn from. We're not in the 60s anymore. We cannot be the Dubai anymore. It's a different moment. The growth then was socially unbalanced. It created inequalities that contributed to the civil war after. And we have to be careful of building something much more sustainable, socially, environmentally, and something more sustainable financially, as we learned from the post-war civil boom, where the macro turned out at the end to be unsustainable. Too much debt, too much consumption, not enough investment in a productive economy. And so, equipped with this knowledge, we kind of asked, what are our comparative advantage? So it was clear that talking to entrepreneurs, even though they live in this very difficult environment, is that Lebanon has what it takes to be successful. It has an entrepreneurial ecosystem that is, I guess, has roots in Phoenician times, values, drive. It has a broad intellectual capital, like we can see here at AUB, and in the many schools dating back to Ma'allim al-Bistani. We have a deep tradition of knowledge as the most valued capital in society. I mean, that all parents strive to educate their kids. We have a valuable brand. The Lebanon brand around the world is still valued. Its value maybe is falling a little bit, but it still has value. It's based on the culture, on nature. I mean, again, look at AUB. It's the closest you can be to paradise. And it's based really also, as I said earlier, on this deep integration in the world economy. We live at the pulse of the world economy, and largely through this very large diaspora all around the world that connects us to the world, to technologies, to knowledge, to finance, to markets, and we can think of Lebanon as I said, at the heart of this global Lebanon. And there are a wide range of high-value niche products that we have produced and that we can produce in the future. We can be a nearshoring base for high-value goods and specialty services. Entrepreneurs talked about all kinds of goods, export of high-skilled services that's already happening, whether it's doctor, engineers, artists, designers, accountants, working in this great environment and producing for the global market, as opposed to living in expensive and polluted capitals around the world. We could imagine that to be across the territory. The diaspora network is where we can attract technologies and export goods. And that kind of model can happen all across the territory, using the whole territory and all kinds of skills, because those goods include also high-valued crafts, sustainable agribusiness, niche manufacturers such as pharmaceutical, jewelry, furnitures. All of these are high-value products that are very much leveraged on cultural content, skills, and high-tech. And so, it seems to me the vision is there. What remains is the how-to, how to do it. And so we're lucky that you become minister. Now it's your responsibility, Amer, to do it. Amer economist becoming, Amer the politician. So I invite you to continue this presentation and tell us about that.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. First of all, to the IFI, AUB, Joseph, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. Indeed, this is my very first public appearance today. And I'm very much looking forward to this opportunity to exchange with like-minded friends Mr. Prime Minister, thank you very much for coming, and it's a pleasure to work with you on this project, and thank you, Marina. So listen, I'm going to take this opportunity to sort of take the paper as a starting point. And one of the things that we said in the last few days is that this suddenly turned from a paper that was meant to be a wishful thinking to potentially a work plan, potentially a bayan, right? So I'm going to spend a little bit of time today trying to talk you through how we as a cabinet are thinking about the economic, right? About the economic agenda. Let me start with the nirvana. Let me start with the ideal. Where would we like to go? This is, I mean, you very quickly see that this is a bit of a wishful thinking, but at least it's always good to know where you're heading, right? Where is in a world in which no constraints exist, in which politics is not a constraint, what is the ideal Lebanon? What's the nirvana? And the way we think of it, based on the work that Ishac mentioned and talked about, given the comparative advantage that we have as an economy, it should really be an economy that is one that is based on value-added production, not on rent-seeking, right? Too much of our economy in the past, specifically 20 years or so, even a bit less than that, has been driven by ways in which you're not creating value, you're trying to extract rent from the next person next to you. This is not how economies grow. Economies grow when you create something new. It should be an economy that is relying on the tradable sector as opposed to the non-tradable sector, right? At the end of the day, and not to get too technical about it, we're an economy that is structurally in a balance of payments deficit. Our savings relative to our investment is too low. We need to be outward oriented. Our production should be internationally competitive. I'm not just saying it's exports, but even things that we're producing domestically for internal reasons should be internationally competitive. So either we're creating dollars or we're saving dollars, right? It should be a tradable as opposed to a non-tradable economy. That's the essence of our vision. It should be an economy that is built on strong macro foundations. I'll talk about this later on, but the idea of boom bust, the idea of growing, feeling excited, but not building it on strong macro balances. Inflation is too high, debt is too high, the current account deficit is too big, the budget deficit is too big. You can grow with these imbalances. We'd rather grow without these imbalances. We want to grow with an economy where inflation is low, where the government is disciplined, where the balance of payments is covered, right? And an economy where inflation is low. It should be a strong macro-based economy. It should be an economy that's globally integrated with a strong Western and particularly Arab gaze. The idea of Lebanon as an autarky is a new invention. The idea of Lebanon as a closed economy where we're benefiting from each other doesn't make any sense. A $6 million population is not our objective. Our objective is a much larger world that we want to be part of. We want to be integrated in the global economy. And finally, in this point as mentioned, it has to be an economy that is socio-politically inclusive. The days in which we grow without paying attention to socio-political considerations is a day that becomes a constraint. I think the war, 75 war, is a good memory, is a good reminder of that constraint, right? At some point, socioeconomic imbalances becomes an economic imbalance as well. We need an economy that is socially and politically inclusive, right? So next question that becomes relevant is, and this is now I'm talking about the now, right? Is this the time to imagine? This was the imagination, this was the ideal. Is this the time to start imagining where we want to go, right? I think the answer is yes. I think categorically a window has opened, right? We can go through it. Why is that the case? We have a new government, we have a new president, we have a population that is really wants, it's society that has become convergence on the idea of we need to move forward. A window has opened, right? The reality, however, is that this is an economy that has been stuck in what I call an L-shaped economy for the past 5 years, right? If you think about the Lebanese economy in 2019, you had this massive contraction, the economy completely collapsed. Sometime in 2020, you had this period of incredible instability. And then since then, it's a sad statement to say, but since then we've been stable, right? We've been stable at a very bad equilibrium. We are way below our potential, right? Just to give it numerical, we've been stuck in that $20, $25 billion for an economy of 6 million people, whatever the number is, right? At that $4,000 per capita, which is way below where we need to be for that long, right? So I think a window has opened, but we have to keep in mind that we've been stuck, right? We've collapsed and we've spent the last 5 years literally going absolutely nowhere, right? So the question becomes, right, if this is the window has opened, how do we turn this L into a V? Right? How do what starts the what sort of can bring, I'm going to use the word ignition in a bit. What ignites that recovery so that we go back to where we need to be? Where we are today is well below where we need to be. It's a crime to be where we are right now. This economy, if you look at the comparative advantages that Ishac mentioned, has no business being at $25, $26 billion. This economy should be a 45, 50 billion. We should not be comparing ourselves to a Peru or a Guatemala. We should be comparing ourselves to a Mexico and a Brazil and a Chile. We should be comparing ourselves to a Turkey, to a Portugal, to a Cyprus. Our economy has a much better capability than we are right now, right? I strongly believe, it's a statement, I hope I'm right, that we are ripe for an explosive growth. We are ready for growing, right? One argument is that gravity is upwards. When you're starting from the level that you're starting, and that level, that $25 billion economy is way below where you are, I hate to say it, but chances are higher that you go up than you go down, right? We've been stuck at that low, right? So the gravity is higher from here. This is an economy that wants to grow, right? The private sector is well below its potential. The consumer is well of its potential. The consumer wants to spend more. People want to hire people. Let's say, right? Our exports are well below where they used to be before. Gravity is upwards. When you're starting from that level, it's easier to go up than to go down, right? And that magnet, that gravity, is a very powerful force. Balance sheets are actually clean. I mean, one thing that you know is that you cannot grow if there's too much debt. The reality is, and I know people hate that word, I personally hate it, but the private sector has proved to be exceptionally resilient in the last 5 years. And it's cleaned up its balance sheet. It's in a much healthier position. We can argue how did that debt go down. It's a technical argument about whether it was properly dropped. But the reality is the private sector is in a healthier position today. The consumer is in a healthier position today. He or she does not have the kind of debt that has been the constraint of growth in the pre-2019 period. Pre-2019, we had borrowed so much money, right, that we couldn't grow anymore. We were spending more time paying debt than investing. Today, for bad reasons, we have no debt. For bad reasons, but we have no debt. The balance sheets are clean, and that's always a beginning. That's usually can explain a revival, right? Finally, the global economy, to which the Lebanese economy has historically been extremely correlated, has been exploding. Right? There's so many positive changes that are occurring globally, particularly in the Gulf. In the period in which we stopped growing, the Gulf has doubled in size. The GCC has doubled in size since the period that we're Lebanese. That is historically unacceptable. The US, Lebanon has always been part of that growth, and we've lost it, right? I was looking at some numbers before I came. Between 2019 and today, the global economy has grown from roughly 90 trillion to 125 trillion in 2025. $25 trillion worth of global growth has been created, and we saw none of it. Right? We have to repipe ourselves into the global economy because there is money out there. There is value to be piped in, right? So what is needed to unlock the potential? So the argument I'm making is a window has opened. We've been stuck at this very bad equilibrium. The gravity, the path of least resistance right now is higher, not lower. We're being helped by a global economy that wants to grow, and usually, historically, we pipe into it. We have an economy that is relatively resilient and somewhat healthy. The question is, how do we unlock this potential? Right? And this is where one word, if you were to force me into one word, that word was confidence. We need confidence. We need visibility on where we're heading. We all know the problem is extremely serious. We all know the challenges, and trust me, I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes depressing you in terms of the challenges and how bad things are. But just the knowledge that we can start fixing them, identifying them, putting them on the right track, is what, to my mind, will take us from the L to a V, right? So what is that program, right? What is it? What is needed? What is that visibility? What is that confidence? What generates the confidence, right? There are 4 files. I mean, Ishac and I have referred to this as the ignition, right? The movement from an L to a V is, we need this igniting. It's like the model I have in my mind of the Lebanese economy today is that it's like dry wood. It needs sha'li. It needs a bit of an ignition to start it, right? And that ignition is giving me confidence and visibility of where we're heading. And there are 4 files. None of them is easy. Trust me, they're extremely difficult. The more I look at them, the more I realize they're complicated. But at least knowing what they are and starting the work is going to give that kind of confidence and medium-term visibility that I claim will start that ignition, right? The first is obviously is that we have a reconstruction and we have social policies, right? Unfortunately, there is a result of the collapse, the result of the port explosion, the result of a vicious war that we had to go through this last year. But this is going to come with some funding, right? And that funding could become a multiplier in that economy. So we're going to be spending a lot of time in this cabinet, in this government, thinking about the reconstruction program and the social policies and raising funding for them so that they're done in the appropriate way. And we have examples. I think the 2006 experience is one that we have to learn from, right? And I think there are models that we can use for this fiscal multiplier of spending what could be billions of dollars on both reconstruction and social policies and raising funding for them. That could be the beginning of an impulse, right? But that's not going to be enough. We need to work on sectoral policies. No economy is going to grow with the way the power sector is. No economy is going to grow with the way the telecom sector is. No economy is going to grow without infrastructure spending. Again, nobody's saying we're going to need to fix them, but putting them on the right track, setting up the policies, the laws, the hay'at al-nadhima, using the PPP law, which has been approved in 2022 from memory, which is a good law, right? Using it to fix these sectoral policies, I would claim could be sha'li, the ignition that could start things. Clearly, no economies are going to grow without a financial sector restructuring and dealing with the depositors' problem. You cannot. We live in the 21st century, right? So not only is this a moral issue, and it is a moral issue, dealing with the depositors, it is a moral issue, but it's also an economic one. We're going to not grow without funding, intermediation, capital markets. And finally, and I'm going to open a parenthesis on this, a lengthy parenthesis on this, is this idea that we need to resuscitate, we need to reinvent the state, the government, right? And I'm going to spend a few minutes on this particular file because I think this is a file that is I think we spent a lot of time on the other 3 files, and we're not spending enough time on this idea that we need to reinvent the state. The state, unfortunately, the relationship between the state, the dawli, بكل إداراتها, all its institutions, and the economy, broadly defined, is very unhealthy. Right? We've lost trust in the institutions of the government. And without a government that is an enabler, a regulator, educator, health provider, right? Without it as a protector, as a legal system, right? Without it, we're not going to have an economy. And the reality is, Lebanese state's footprint today is extremely imbalanced, right? More of the spending goes into civil service rather than other services, right? It's predominantly a hiring machine rather than a providing of services machine. And also, and this is controversial, I think the state is too small in Lebanon. In 25, at best, we're going to be spending $5 billion as a state, as a government, right? Most of it is going to go into civil service, by the way. But even if not, $5 billion compares to $13 billion before the crisis. Right? You cannot have a state as an enabler, as a regulator, as an educator, as a provider of infrastructure, right? With that. So there's a big project here in terms of spending priorities, tax regime, civil service reform, governance systems, right? Al-Hawkami, administrative decentralization and financial decentralization, fiscal responsibility and avoidance of unsustainable debt of the kind that we had in the past, right? This is to me, it's a very important file. I'm spending so much of my time talking to the private sector in the last few days, couple of weeks, And this is the number one thing that keeps on coming up. We need a better relationship, a healthy relationship with the state. The state has become tasadumi, has become an obstacle to growth rather than an enabler of growth, right? So the point I'm making, I'm going to go one step. What I'm saying here is that to move from the L to the V, you need to ignite. Igniting needs work on these 4 policies. The good news is we're committed to that. The good news is we as a cabinet, I'm going to speak for them if I can, we're committed to those 4 files. And my conviction is that once we start showing that ignition, I'm actually quite optimistic about the second half of 25. I'm very optimistic about 26. I think we're ready for this ignition. And I think once we work with these files, we can move. The point, however, and this is, I think, the most important point I'm going to make today, is that after the ignition, after this initial phase of growth that I am foreseeing, that we're foreseeing, that I think is reasonable, right? I think it's reasonable to expect this economy, the Lebanese economy, to move out of stagnation and move into a period of strong, explosive growth over the next 2 years. That's not enough. This is actually becomes the boom, and we want to make sure that the boom is not followed by a bust. We're not here to grow for 25 and 26. We're here to grow for the next 30 years. The model, the vision, the nirvana that Ishac and I were talking about is not the next 2 years. It's a 30-year project, right? I would rather be a country Chile, that grows on average 3% a year, 3.5% a year, but it's been growing consistently for the last 40 years, than an Argentina that grows at 20% 1 year and then crashes by 15 the next year, right? Which unfortunately is more the Lebanese model, right? So we want to make sure that not only do we ignite this economy, we sustain the growth. And the sustenance, this sort of sustainability, needs to unlock structural constraints. So this is not just about igniting with these files, these short-term files. We need to work on long-term files. There's a lot of dossiers, right? I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'm just going to give you the titles, right? It's still a deplorable climate for doing business. The private sector is always complaining, rightly so. It's woefully inadequate infrastructure, outdated and inefficient tax regime. There's a skills mismatch between what we're good at and what we're producing. There's an environmental degradation that is not just moral. It's an economic concept, right? Ishac said it beautifully. At the end of the day, one of our comparative advantages is the beauty of our country. I would rather, and this is an example you've given us, I'm going to steal it from you. I'd rather be working out of Chamma, producing some designer, than sitting in London with all of its high taxes and let alone New York or something like that. So the environmental degradation is taking away from us an important asset that we have as a country, as an economy, right? Outdated foreign trade policy. I can't believe that we're still autarkic. We still think of ourselves as a country. We're 6 million people, for God's sake, right? Rather than pipe into the rest of the world. And finally, the importance of social sustainability. We can go through this in the poverty, the income inequality, right? The gender issues, right? All of these things, we're not going to be able to sustain this 30-year growth that I'm thinking about if we don't deal with these structural constraints. So yes, work on the 4 files so that we can ignite. Importantly, though, is keep in mind the 30-year view, not the 5-year view, right? Here I'm going to spend 2 seconds on incrementalism versus gradualism. Versus radicalism, right? There are 2 models in which we can work, right? Both on the ignition and on the sustaining. We can be shock therapy, right? Jeff Sachs type of work, where we go out there and you say, listen, the second best is always bad. If you start slowly, the vested interests are too powerful, they're going to stop you. Might as well just go all out. Spend the next year just all out. Every file I spent on, do it right now. And there's an argument for that, by the way. There's an argument for horizontalism, right? Which is that you identify all your files and you start working on all of them. And you say, listen, we have 1 year, 1 year and a half, let's work on everything and essentially reduce the scope for reversal afterwards. There's another argument that says, no, verticalism, right? Choose your type, choose your fights, choose your battles, and make sure you work on them and work slowly. This is going to be my opinion. I don't want to give it to anyone. My preference is for the second. Lebanon, at the end of the day, is still extremely complicated demographically, religiously. Obviously, the neighborhood we're living in, the President is very powerful. The administration is weak. I think it's dangerous to go all out right now and be too aggressive. So I think you're going to, at least if I have any influence, it will be more along the lines of focus on few things, low-hanging fruit, make sure we focus on the ignition, keep in mind the sustenance files, make sure they're on the right track, but focus on 3 or 4 things that can make a difference in the short run. Something to be debated, okay? Okay, so here I'm sorry I talked way too long. I'm going to conclude, right? So one of the points I'm trying to make, we tried to make, and I think it's collective, not just me, I think the old model is dead, right? We must reimagine a new productive Lebanon, right? I think we've tried it in the past. There were some successes. They tended to be short-lived. This is a time to really be bold in terms of imagining where we want to be. I think the time is ripe, and gravity is upwards. We are so below potential that it doesn't take much to ignite this economy, right? First step is to put the house in order. That's the ignition. These are the 4 files I talked about. Reconstruction, financial sector, the sectoral policies, and resuscitating the state. Let's work on those. And I have fairly strong conviction that once we start working on those files, the economy will explode. But it's important that ignition is not enough. We need to unlock the constraints that ensure that this game that I'm talking about sustains for the next 25 to 30 years rather than just a 2-year game. With that, Marina, I'm going to stop and thank you very much for listening to me.
So thank you very, very much for a very straight to the point and concise, not only overview of the report, but of, I think, if we can consider it, can we consider it the vision of the government for the economy?
Hello. No, I obviously cannot speak for the government. All I can do is speak for myself, but we have a document. The document is the Bayan al-Wizari. And when you look at the Bayan al-Wizari and when you look at all the things that as a guiding for us and the work that Prime Minister Salam has asked us all to do, which is start delivering or sort of defining clearly short-term, medium-term, and long-term projects, I'm going to say with some conviction that it's going to be driven by a vision like this. I think the DNA of this cabinet, the DNA of Prime Minister Salam, the DNA of my colleagues is the DNA of a productive economy, of a liberal economy, of an export-oriented economy, of a socially sustainable economy.
I'm going... Yes.
You know, this document also, I think it reflects what Lebanon wants, right? When we spoke to people and we spent, weeks speaking with different people, entrepreneurs, think tanks, and the like, there was no big points of debate. Like, there was a big convergence towards that vision. It's immanent, it's there. I think this is what the country wants, basically. And this new government very much represents, I think, the image of the country that we want. So there's something natural about applying this program. The big question is on the how, really.
And this takes me to my first. So I'm going to ask very, very short. Well, there's nothing short about the questions nor the answers about this topic, but I'll try to be straight to the point, and then we'll open the floor for Q&A. So, as you said, everything makes sense. Everything that you document in the research paper is something that people in the field have been dreaming for years, but then the problem obviously has been the implementation. And whether it's the politics or what you talk about in the paper as the constraints. So, of course, in the preface of the paper, you note that politics was not a constraint. And this makes sense because otherwise, we wouldn't be writing anything at all, neither on economics or practically anything else. But Minister, you've been now part of the system for about a month now. So knowing all too well all of the constraints, how big do you expect? Well, I'm expecting they're quite big, but how big will the constraints really be?
So, I mean, it's a very good question. So let me start with the methodology and then give the caveat. I'm going to read the caveat for a second. The methodology that Ishac and I talked about is that, as a methodological argument, is let's ignore politics. Let's say we have no constraint on the politics. How would we imagine the country? And then define the constraints that we want to be removing from the economic fronts. And that helped us articulate a lot of the flow of the ideas, right? So in a sense, you start with the ideal, you define where the problems is, that gets you to that ideal, and you say, okay, if I had the complete capability of being able to do it, how would I, like, what is it? The how? But then we end, and I'm going to quote here, I say, while the report was written with the politics is not a constrained assumption, the reality is New Lebanon needs to change its politics. The current sectarian system has violently resisted the kinds of programs we articulate in this report. The hope is that the future vision will coalesce into a collective force that agitates for a new political system. So it's a way of saying political reform, political change is a very important part. There's nothing called economics alone. We need to also change the politics in order to be able to get. And this is where I think, I mean, again, a lot of the work that has been written about in the government, Judge Salam's work itself is a guiding principle in that.
Having a clear vision of where you want to go gives you ammunition to fight the political fight. I think that's really the methodology here.
I'd like to also ask a bit of a micro question. So, of course, and I know that you've been asked this before, and it's a logical part of the paper in terms of how to get where we want to get, the banking sector. I know you don't like that question very much. I mean, it's a very difficult question, of course, and it's something that we will be grappling, and people are taking a close, paying attention to what will happen. And of course you talk about it because the banking sector, as you very well describe it, is bankrupt. It needs reform, it needs reinvention, restructuring, consolidation, everything in order to get it back to its logical role of being a lender and of being a funder, which is something that it really didn't do in the past 20 and 25 years. You mentioned that the sector needs cleanup efforts and impaired assets need to be heaved off. So first of all, how would you translate this in terms of policy? And again, the constraints to this, because we know of the deep-rooted, vested interests in the sector, and it goes also beyond the sector. So how do you envisage this will really play out politically?
So first of all, with absolute apologies, I'm not going to be detailed in my answer. I hope you'll understand and why, right? I mean, I'll explain, but it's very different. I'm not going to be detailed. I'm not going to get into any details into this, right? For multiple reasons. One reason is we're still discussing it. Right? We're not going to take this lightly. This is an incredibly important file where the livelihood of hundreds of thousands of people is at stake. Right? The tragedy that happened in 2019, 2020 is something that is socially, morally, and economically extremely important. We're going to take it very seriously. We're going to be discussing it in great terms. Two, I'm not the only person who decides on this. There's multiple other players, not least of which is the Minister of Finance and certainly the central bank. And as you know, we don't even have a governor of the central bank. But I could say with some confidence that this is a priority for us, is to have a head of the central bank. Third comment I would make is that this is not a new topic. This has been a topic that has been discussed quite intensely in the last 4 or 5 years, right? And there's been enormous amounts of studies, thinking, proposals. Quite a few of them are good. A lot of them are converging, are becoming closer and closer to in terms of. We're going to be studying them. We're going to be looking at them. We're going to be looking at all the data before we actually make a sort of a formal approach to this.
Fourth point, though, is that, and we've heard this quite explicitly, the rights of depositors is a moral, constitutional, political, and economic imperative. We're not going to take that. We're not going to be playing with that. This is an important. Right? But at the same time, often that is put as a contradiction to the other priority, which is reviving the banking sector, as if the two are opposing to each other. And we think there's a way in which we can do the two together. We can revive the banking sector while maintaining the sanctity of that depositor's right as well. Fifth point, no solution is not going to be, we're going to have to discuss it. Nobody's going to impose any solution. This is something I'm going to be discussing. And it's going to be, I can't think of the word in English, but tasharuki. It has to be a collaborative solution as well. There's many stakeholders. The stakeholders are known, right? There's the government, there's the banks, there's the central bank as well. And it's going to have to be a collaborative solution, right? So it's going to have to be consultative and it's going to be cooperative as well.
And my last question before you open the floor, trying to make it a bit more of an academic focus. The vision that you present in the paper is economically liberal. However, and I think you use the word smart state regulation. Okay, there's a lot of policies envisioned, whether it's expansionary fiscal policy, regulating the mismatch in the various sectors, whether it's social, labor, and educational sectors. Now, also, a lot of the policies that you have envisioned, whether it's to promote exports, encourage exports to new markets, also have been seen to be a role that has been taken up by the government. Also, interestingly enough, you also mentioned temporary protective trade policies, which of course is something that industrial countries have done for years as well. How do you, on the ground, how will this balance out? So you have an economically liberal vision, whereas you have, or you intend to have government regulation, not to call it intervention, but regulation. How does this play out in the real world?
Well, I can start that. I can even ask my students to tell us about that. You know, one tends to intuitively think of a liberal economy as one without a state, where the market operates all alone. But it's very much wrong. You cannot have a liberal economy with competition under the rule of law, without institutions, without a regulatory state. Otherwise, you end up with mafias and monopolies and consumers being taken advantage of. And so a proper liberal economy in the sense of a competitive economy that pushes firms to innovate and to gain market shares and to displace old firms that are not competitive anymore, creative destruction, that requires institutions and regulation and a strong state, actually. Now, of course, we can have state failures also, and a state that's unable to correct market failures, and that's a problem. So that's why we need a strong state, actually, in order to have a strong market economy. I want to add something to what you were saying before. We've taken great care in the paper to make reference to all the great work that's happening among Lebanese intellectuals, because all these issues are discussed and analyzed, and intellectuals have been speaking in the air. Nobody's been listening for a long time, but they have put the basis for this regeneration of our society and economy. The knowledge is there. What's missing has been the political will, and now we have a president, we have a prime minister, hopefully you'll win parliament soon, and so we'll have the 30 years that are necessary to build the economy that we need.
I think we are now ready to open the floor for questions from the audience. Just a small, just something small, kindly. Just if you can kindly raise your hand, we'll get you a microphone.
Hello.
So, well,
Nabil Fahad.
Just 1 second. I just wanted to, ask if whoever has a question will raise your hand as you already have. Kindly introduce yourself, and if you can make the questions as short and straight to the point as possible, so that we can get as many as possible. تفضل.
Okay. Nabil Fahd, I'm the Vice Chairman of the Chamber of Commerce. The paper or the study that you have presented, is being, I would say, very well supported by the business community. We have already voiced that to Minister Bisat. But I want to focus on one issue, which is the protection of the investments. We as investors inside our country, we feel naked, we feel always harassed, we feel exploited. When you mention, Ishac, that you need a strong state, we are afraid because we've been exploited by the strong state. We want a fair state, really. We want a state that protects our investment. And of course, throughout the paper, sorry, maybe I missed it, but I did not see anywhere where you talk about the rule of law, where you're protecting us from smugglers and the illegal economy. One other point is about your focus on increasing exports. We should also look at the import substitution, which we have experienced in the past 5 years. The level of import substitution has tremendously increased, and that has resulted also in the increase in the import of raw materials. So maybe the trade balance doesn't reflect it, but in the export of goods, you're always going to have, a very small value added for the exports. And I would say maybe there we really need to focus on or differentiate between the export of goods and the export of services, where we probably will be in a much better position and excel much more than the export of goods. Thank you.
Can I quickly react? And sort of turn it to you as well, because with the whole idea of the composition, we didn't touch upon the composition and the regional aspects. You can, Nabil, thanks for the question, Nabil. That's what I meant when I said there's no confidence between the state and the economy. I fully recognize this. I personally, and this is my view, but the relationship between the state and the private sector in particular has become very unhealthy. It's no longer collaborative. It's no longer complementary. It's become too tazadumi. It's become too confrontational, right? And the state has stopped being the enabler and often has become the blockers, right? And we need to change that. And there's multiple reasons for that, right? There's multiple reasons of which, not the least of which is that the state itself has become, this is a point I was trying to make, is that it's become imbalanced. We're not providing services anymore, we're just hiring people, and become very small. The state has become too small. Not small as a productive entity, but as a provider of services, investment, infrastructure, better regulation, right? We need to work on that. There's no question about it. To me, that's an important file that has, and to be fair to this cabinet, this is something that we're thinking quite seriously about. On the export versus import, I would generalize it personally and talk about tradables. Whatever we produce in this country has to be competitive globally. Whether we export it or we use it for domestic markets, the important thing is that whatever we produce here has to be competitive, right? Which is, so it becomes, we can talk about protection here, protectionism. But to me, the guiding principle is, let's make sure that whatever we produce can either make us dollars or save us some dollars.
Hello, Ali Aboud, Department of Economics. I'm Ishac's junior colleague. Thank you for an optimistic plan and presentation. Allow me to be the pessimist here, and I want to basically tackle some of the assumptions you make in the presentation. Some of the things from we cannot just look at it as if we stayed where we are in 2019, because actually there is some level of degradation that some of it is not directly measurable. Like we can all see the infrastructure that degraded, but other things that used to be considered comparative advantage to Lebanon, like the high quality, like the high human capital, I think that's highly questionable now. I don't know how our education levels did drop in the country. So I think some of these assumptions need to be a little bit revisited, and because if we want to invest in infrastructure, we're also going to need to invest in these other like non-tangible, like or not directly observable kind of thing. But also one assumption about that the world economy is doing better and that the world is growing. Yes, we can see that in the aggregate, but I mean I don't have the numbers, but pretty much like the anecdotal evidence would say that it's some countries in the world are growing. The reality is most small economies like Lebanon have been suffering for the past few years, and we are an extreme case, but many other countries, small countries, have also went through that crisis. And especially when we come back to this time when you have with the current administration in the US and the tariff wars, trade wars, so how would that impact us vis-a-vis this vision that you have here? So that's like my first issue. The other issue is like to bring to 3 points you mentioned: confidence, the clean balance sheets, and the financial sector. I think these 3 issues are related because while private businesses were cleaning their balance sheet, they did it at the expense of other balance sheets. We had a massive redistribution of wealth in the country. And so treating the financial sector and the depositor issue as just like as a separate idea without taking into consideration how this transfer or reverse transfer of wealth happened will impact the idea of confidence. Like, how are the citizens going to buy in to this, new plan or new ideas if they feel it's starting from already an unequal place? Okay, thank you. That's.
I'll make a point and then please. I mean, jump in afterwards. We actually, it's by the way, it's in the paper. We did talk about the idea of assets. Our comparative advantage is an asset. If you think about it in economic terms, it's an asset, right? That you monetize it through production. You use it in production. And there's no question that our assets are depreciating and they're degrading, right? I mean, the environmental degradation is a degradation of a very important asset we have. I should have started with that one. The massive brain drain is a huge asset depreciation, right? We're losing it, I agree. The asset that we've always had, which is the Lebanese brand, we're depreciating. So you're right, the starting point is much worse than it could have been. But you have to be an optimist, and you have to look back at the history. And it's amazing, if you go back at the history of Lebanon, how many times we've gone through similar crises, and we always seem to recover. All the way back to the turn of the century. I mean, like, if you go back to the Safar Berlik and the massive migration post the silk collapse, we recovered. Right? There was a mass. Obviously, there was the Civil War was a massive shock, and the 91 comes, 93 comes, and we recover, and people come back. I don't think there's a reason to immediately assume that our assets are gone. Right? I think we have to be hopeful. We still have the je ne sais quoi of Lebanon, right? The smart people, the vibrant private sector, the strong support by the diaspora, the physical location that we have, our connectivity to the Arab world. All of these things are assets that are not going to die overnight. So I still, again, reasonable people could differ on this. I still think if we give the confidence, if we start putting the house in order, I think it's too pessimistic to give up yet, right? I actually feel fairly strongly about this. Your point about global growth, we can spend hours talking. This is something I tend to know quite well because that's what I used to do for a living. And you could argue, right? We could reasonably argue on which developing countries were benefited and which poor countries did not. Right? Mexico benefited, right? So Bangladesh did. India certainly has. Vietnam on fire, right? And there are countries that have not. In Africa, they have not. It's true, right? Many countries in Africa, parts of Latin America have not, right? The point I would make is, why are we comparing ourselves necessarily to the latter and not to the former? And historically, we've always been globally integrated. If you look back at the last couple of 100 years, and the correlation between Lebanese growth and global growth has always been very, very strong. for reasons that are obvious, the ones I just talked about, right? So yes, there has been an imbalanced global growth in the last 10, 15 years. But ex ante, we should have been part of the winners. Right? I mean, I'm going to finish with this. I mean, the rerouting, the trade tariff war that you're talking about, has been a disaster for some countries and an amazing victory for others. Mexico today is the largest exporter to the US. It's nowhere close to China. China is nowhere close to Mexico anymore. The countries have been able to re-pipe themselves into the new trade channels. Right? There's a massive change in the way trade has been. Overall trade has come down, to your point, but within it there's been a huge compositional shift with some winners and some losers. The ones I talked about, the Bangladesh, the Vietnam, the India, and the Mexico. There's no reason why we can't be that. I mean, historically, we're always one of the winners from global integration. It's a crime that we've become autarkic.
No, I think it's hard to add to what you've said, but I'll try, because there are many pessimists like Ali, and we need to convince them. Because it's by exchanging expectation is the name of the game here. I'll try to add a few arguments. One argument is the Saura of 2019. There is a dynamic of social change that hopefully will build and become unstoppable. That's the base for the change, right? It's the new generation, it's the students here. That's one. Two, there is a push from the rest of the world. I mean, I know many academics in the US, in France, that just want to come here because we have freedom of thinking, of speech here. They don't anymore. It's not going very well in the rest of the world. And remember, in 2008, our finances were terrible. But because of the global financial crisis, Lebanon became a safe haven. In a way, we're moving towards becoming a safe haven, again, if we can fix our act. And finally, the last thing to say is, and we speak about it in the paper, we need to develop an economy that's resilient, because we're going to live in this poor neighborhood for a while. I mean, we're surrounded by countries at war with problems, God knows how they're going to solve them. And somehow we have to become resilient. And the kind of economy we're talking about, which is exporting services, exporting sustainable agriculture, high-skilled craft that is built on culture, cultural products, are actually the kind of goods that are increasingly demanded in this world and in our neighborhood. And they are resilient. They don't require massive investment in capital that can burn if there is a war. People can move around. And so we do need to, a bit like Korea and other countries that have developed in spite of being in a bad neighborhood, think about surviving in a bad neighborhood, because we cannot, we can escape through our economy, but not physically.
Hello. Okay, Mr. Minister, Mr. Diwan, thank you for this very insightful talk. My question is oriented a bit towards a government policy, or let's say a position in general. Because I too am optimistic, but it would help to know some specifics in regards to development in the economy. And I wrote it down here to be as specific as I could. So, what steps will be taken towards propping up local industries and focusing on local products to combat the trade deficit and support local sustenance? So in a way, what I'm asking is, how can elements of a localized economy and small businesses in general be supported by the government to jumpstart a healthy economy, independent from remittances and tourism and so on?
So this is one of my oldest memories. I remember when I first started the IMF, I worked at the fund, and I remember I was working on Russia, and I asked the question, where is growth going to come from? What is that? And I remember this older guy who looked very old, probably was younger than me now, who told me, it's not your job to know where the growth is going to come from. Your job as a policymaker is to set the right policies, the right set of enabling, and the private sector will take care of itself. Right? And I honestly, I've been here for a month, and I've spoken to almost every single hay'a iqtisadiyya And they're very creative people, right? And then, by the way, more important than the last month, when we had our seminars back in 21, we were both shocked by the creativity, the entrepreneurial. There was this element of give us the right framework, the right environment, and we will thrive. So I'm not going to be in a position to tell you. I don't want to be in a position to tell you. Right? Which brings me to a secondary point, and here I'm speaking for myself. This whole protectionism is a big demand right now, right? And ex ante, ideologically, I tend to be against it. I tend to sort of believe in competitiveness. I tend to believe in if we're not competitive, we shouldn't be producing, right? Because to me, who do I help? Do I help 1,000 producers or 1 million consumers? That trade-off between the two, and protection tends to help 1,000 and hurt 1 million because you're getting less productive, more expensive products, right? But I have to say, I've qualified my view on this. The starting point of this country, the problem of smuggling, the problem of dumping, the problem of counterfeiting, the massive distortions that exist, no electricity, very expensive telecommunication. I've changed my mind. I've become much less sort of close to the idea that we need to help. We have to be very intelligent about helping. I think I'm going to be very honest here, some of the protectionist moves in the last couple of years were a little bit ad hoc, rather than thoughtful. We need to be thinking about the impact study of what we're trying to protect and how. But I've become much more open to the idea that helping domestic production, given the circumstances, is something we need to be thinking about.
And I think you also clarified this in the paper. We're talking about smart and temporary. And I think this is very important because, unfortunately, in the country, everything that relates to support, protection, or subsidies has been politically motivated and has been gone for decades on end to great losses to government finances. Yes, please.
Yeah, hi, I'm Rima Majid, sociologist at AUB. So I'm coming to this from the question. I mean, we've heard a lot about the economic aspect of things, and there's a lot to discuss. I mean, growth, but also inequality. I mean, we've mentioned Saura. The uprisings in this part of the world are specifically because of the very high rates of inequality, the very high rates of youth unemployment. So I would like to hear a bit more about the social aspects of. I mean, are we just repeating the trickle-down economy? And what is different in what you're presenting from the 90s and, the pre-Civil War era at the social level? Because we were hearing a lot about the entrepreneurs, and it seems like, I tend to disagree that the state is necessarily against the private sector in Lebanon. I think this is something we need to really think about. I mean, it's more nuanced than that. The main obstacle in the report is the sectarian system. That's one of them. But it's also, in many cases, the bankers and the private sector. I mean, and that we cannot disregard anymore. And here, I'm thinking, are we talking about the liberal economy, or are we talking about a very fierce neoliberal economy? Where do we make this distinction between the state? And what is this new government promising us at the social level, beyond just focusing on because the entrepreneurial approach has huge social costs. We live in a country where every worker or employee has to care for their parents. The social reproduction cost of living in a country where the state does not provide is immense. So what is this government thinking in that direction? Thank you.
Look, we do recognize that for a model to be sustainable, it has to be socially just. Now, how do you go about it is a question to think about. I think one thing we realize is that industry, which can absorb, a lot of, say, low, medium-skilled people, is not our comparative advantage. You have China factory out there, so we need a different model. The model, rests a lot about the export of services. This is high scale. This is not going to help. It will give, an incentive for families to send their kids to school and to the return to education is high, but it's not good enough. But we have agribusiness, we have skills in terms of craft and the like, we have tourism, but we also need social policies. We need to regulate entry, for example, into this labor market so that low and medium skilled people earn a good living, so minimum wages could be high. We need to reform informality so that social security is wider. We need taxes to be more progressive. We talk about that so that there is redistribution and services that promote social mobility as well. This is at the heart of the model. Otherwise, this economy will not be sustainable. And so it's a challenge, but it is the important challenge to focus on in terms of what do we call that, sustaining the model.
So, first of all, let me double sort of underscore what Ishac just said. No, our vision is very different than the pre-war vision, precisely on the point of social sustainability, inclusiveness, environmental. To us, these are important tenets, right? And a big part of the boom bust of the last 50 years has been ignoring those. So that just to be very clear, right? And if you don't mind, I'm going to just quote one line from the study where we say that the system in Lebanon has been hijacked by a labyrinth of oligarchy, cartels, and an insidious government-private sector interactions, right? So fully recognize that this has to be changed. That's very much part of the new Lebanon, right? Your point, I mean, I think I may have sort of confused you, and I apologize for this, in terms of when I talk about the role of the state, right? You can chew and walk at the same time. You can chew gum and walk at the same time. I am completely of the view that a new Lebanon requires, like what Ishac said in one of the questions, that a liberal economy needs a good government. It needs institutions. It needs regulation. It needs ensuring that the market works properly, right? The government is an incredibly important part of any growth model. The point I'm trying to make is that the government today is inefficient. Right? So this is not about the concept of a government in the new Lebanon, but the government today. It's extremely imbalanced. We're not providing any service. The delivery of services are very weak. It's predominantly a hiring agency rather than a provider of services. And it's actually quite small relative to its historical size, right? So when I say the government is today, we need to resuscitate the trust in the government, that's what I mean. I meant we have to rebalance. We wrote it down. We need to think of spending priorities. We need a more progressive tax regime, right? We need to think of a new civil service reform for meritocracy. So it's less about the role of the state and more about the state today. I don't know if that makes sense. Social policy, an incredibly important part of the agenda. Next, I ask you to invite Minister Haneen Sayed, who will wax eloquent about both the programs, but also the funding. The amount of money we're going to be putting into a big part of what we're going to be asking for donors is for social policies. Invite her, she'll tell you.
I want to add one thing. Remember, we are in a terrible state. I mean, the state used to be, $12 billion or so? It's now $3 billion or so. We're at in a horrible position.
Most of it is wages.
Yeah, it is mostly wages, but wages are a third or a quarter of what they used to be. So this is a vision, and it's going to take many years of hard work to achieve what we're talking about. But the challenges are enormous.
Is it on? No. Okay. So my name is Diyar. I'm an economics student at AUB, and my question is, I know you have an incrementalist approach, so maybe this topic is not extremely urgent, but after the regime changed in Syria, it seemed that there is a potential for a structural and ethical plan to manage the refugee crisis. Now that we're seeing what's happening in Syria, it might not be the case that that's feasible. So I'm wondering if it's not possible to have an ethical structural plan for managing the refugee crisis, do you think they could be integrated into the economy? And if so, how do you think that could be done?
I mean, I'm just a teacher at AUB, right? But I would agree with you. I'm sure that the government has tensions on all sides, and we'll see how they manage this crisis. Clearly, we're getting support. We've been getting support from the international community so far to care for the refugees. I hope this can continue. With budget cuts all around the world, we can expect a worse situation.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm Mona Fawad, I'm Professor of Urban Planning here at AUB. And I just have a quick comment. I think really we're never going to have confidence in the state if there's no accountability. So one word that I missed today was the term accountability, and I think it really should be part of the narrative. Now for my question, I work on real estate, and I know that in the last 30 years, real estate or land has been used as a way to bring in foreign capital into the country. And a lot of facilities, inflated loans were introduced, and real estate speculation was often seen as productive in that sense. And to the point that in counting empty apartments in Beirut, we know that about 1 in 5 apartments in Beirut that was built after 1990 is empty today, never been inhabited. It's an investment. So we've basically turned what should be productive, our cities, into safety deposit boxes where people place their investments. And I'm wondering if you see this as one of the low-hanging fruits, and if we're going to see reforms in that direction soon.
Thanks a lot, Mona. Apology. I mean, as in like, no, muhasabah and sort of understanding the past. Is an incredibly important part, and you're right. We didn't talk about it, but it doesn't mean that it's not important. It's a very important part of the bayan. It's something that like we cannot escape the idea that without understanding what happened and making sure that we're not going to be able to transcend. And there's so many examples in the world of that. I'm thinking of South Africa. I'm thinking we cannot even forgive if you don't know. Even if we decide that it's fine and we want to reach a settlement, you'd better get it and understand it. So yes, muhasabah, clearly important part of where we want to head. I use the technical term in the presentation, which rent seeking. Right? Rent seeking characterized the economic model, particularly in the last 15 years or so, right? It stopped being about production, it became about how do we, and the property sector and the construction sector is an incredibly important part of it, right? Now, you can be a little bit more macroeconomic about it. This is where I'm going to bring in. Yeah, in a world in which where the currency was fixed, where the currency became extremely overvalued, right? You started needing to raise interest rates aggressively to keep the game going. Why produce? Savings financial saving became more important than production, right? So what we're after right now, at least the way we think about it, is move away from this idea of just making money through interest rates, through coupons, through rent, through corruption. Corruption becomes a way in which, and do it more in the productive. So this switch, and there's no answer. There's no simple answer. I wish it was the whole book, the presentation is about how do we move from rent seeking to productivity. That's the whole idea, is how do we move from living in a world in which all you're making is clipping coupons and receiving rents to one where you use your money to produce and hire people. So very well, did I say it right?
If we have time for one last question, please.
Yes, hello, my name is Isa. I'm a master's student at LAU studying economics, and I had a double-edged question. So first of all, the question refers to a statement done by the previous governor of the central bank. He's previously stated that he intends to get the money back for the depositors, possibly through going through the people that had paid off their loans during the crisis. I wanted to ask about this feasibility and whether it's being discussed, one, and two, whether this could be a double-edged sword, because we know that industries in Lebanon, specifically the top industries in Lebanon and the biggest ones, are the ones that provide the most jobs to the population. So according to this, you might be poking at the wrong place and the wrong time. So I want to ask about your opinion on it, Governor.
No, I'm going to have to apologize. I mean, that's a detail. It's not a detail. It's an extremely important question that is being discussed in every paper that has been written on this topic, right? I'm not going to answer this question. I mean, this is something that has been thinking about, and we'll get to it when we have a more elaborate position.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, the students are here, and it's about, by the way, this course today is about smart industrial policy.
One last question.
Thank you. With many inaugurations taking place nowadays, my mind can't help but go back to JFK's Ask Not inauguration speech. Ask not what you can do, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. حتى ما اتفلسف كتير بالسبيتشز بس اللي بدي اساله المهم بالنسبه لي is not only Lebanon is the country with havoc and disaster and lots of maybe accursed geopolitics. I mean, post-Nazi Germany, they knew that they should keep their work ethic, and that's one of the things that brought Germany back to now being on top of its game in NATO and with the EU. How can we counter this cynical, unproductive, daily thing that we hear every Lebanese, this rhetoric that nepotism and the oligarchy and the whole it's true. We did lose some of our faith in our belief in our systems, but it's also our responsibility. We can't just always avoid responsibility. There is a huge issue that we should counter. I think the Lebanese people need to know how to counter it in terms of rhetoric, so that we can change as a community and then also change from downwards upwards as well. There should be, I don't know, some way, and guidance, I think, on that would be important. Thank you.
I'm an optimist, and I've seen since 2015 an incredible thriving of the civil society. Right? Since 2015, there's been an enormous amounts of movements and people really want to. I mean, again, the example of this paper, when we ran all these seminars, everybody was excited, everybody was interested, everybody wants to. In every meeting I've had in the last month, people want to change, right? So does that mean the constraints you mentioned, nepotism, oligarchy, sectarian politics, corruption, they exist? Of course they exist. We all know that, right? Are you right that they're all extremely pessimistic and there's no way out? I don't think so. I mean, you couldn't have gone through all the way to 2019 right? I mean, without hope, without a civil society, without middle class, without an intellectual class that wants to change. I'm an optimist.
Yeah, no, I agree. We're in a kind of prisoner's dilemma, if you like, kind of situation where everybody's waiting for the others to behave in order to behave. And so I think leadership can make a big difference here, and a vision for the future can make I'll give you a bad example. Saudi Arabia with MBS. I mean, everybody was a Salafist. They would cover their women. The women can't work. And it just took leadership to suddenly realize that, no, everybody thought the other person thought this way, but actually it's not such a conservative society, and it's okay for women to work. And now, just in a few years, female labor force participation is the highest in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia. Imagine. And what an experiment that sometimes societies are just way below their potential, and the right expectation, the right leadership can make them flip. Are we at a moment like this? Perhaps.
And I think you touched on a very way to conclude this very insightful discussion is leadership. So before 2025, we always used to say that we have a problem of leadership. We've never had one leader. We've had 17 different leaders in this country. So I think now, if anything, I at least will promise you not to, as you very well noted in the paper, not to fall too much into the cynicism, to not drag myself too much into depression. At least, the least we can do is to be cautiously optimistic. We have our government, at least from my side, which for me gives me hope because it appreciates and it understands the importance of economics, because for far too long, economics was put on the back burner. It was always the politics, which is obviously not less important, but it was security, it was politics, and economics was important, but it was always on the back burner. So if we now know that economics is put on the forefront as a priority, I think that at least can give us some cautious optimism. Your Excellency, Dr. Amer Bisat, Dr. Ishac Diwan, thank you so much for this very insightful discussion. I'd like to invite you, please, for a small coffee in our spillover room. Please, attend our events. Make sure that you follow us on social media as well as on our mailing list. And thank you once again.